On today's episode of the MilCom Founders Podcast, we'll meet Jesse Levin, currently serving as the executive director of the Defense Entrepreneurs Forum and recently finished volunteering as a member of the resistance team under the IWISOF in Competition Project. He is the founder of Tactivate, an initiative that has spent the past 15 years cultivating informal networks of SOF veterans, economic stability, and humanitarian specialists to conduct last-mile contested logistics, recovery, stability, and capacity-building efforts in support of governments and local populaces in crisis and conflict environments worldwide. Jesse holds a BS from Babson College, is a CSIS AILA Fellow, and a member of the Explorers Club.
Welcome to the MilCom Founders Podcast, where we champion and celebrate military community business founders. In each episode, we will talk with a MilCom business founder to learn how they work through various obstacles and opportunities in business and in life. I'm your host, Rod Loches. Let's meet today's guest. Hey, Jesse, thanks very much for joining us today. Appreciate it. This is MilCom Founders Podcast, where we champion and celebrate the military community. And our hope is that we inspire and educate others through this conversation. Make sense?
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So tell me the story of Jesse growing up. You have a twin sister, I think it is, but just tell me that.
Twin sister. I got a minute on her, so technically the big brother, but she used to kick the living daylights out of me. Still probably could, I grew up in Connecticut. I would have to say the most pivotal experience as it pertains to the conversation we're likely to have is spent my summers going to something called the Tom Brown Tracker School, which was a wilderness philosophy kind of survival school program, where actually a lot of the kind of soft community used to go for, escape and evasion training and things of that nature. East Coast guy. We went to school on the East Coast. Wow. And then kind of blew town in my junior year for Latin America. Never really came back, but finished up school eventually, and here I am, however many years later.
Amazing. What's your favorite country in Latin America?
That's a tricky one. I fell in love with. I took a semester off from Babson and traveled. I just wanted to learn Spanish. I traveled around Chile and Argentina and fell in love with Patagonia. I've been to a lot of weird places, and still nowhere that I can think of besides Patagonia where I could go out for a week and a half at a time in the mountains and not see a single other person. It was just spectacular.
Wow. Fantastic. Yeah. So we're talking about a wide range of things today with Tactivate and your involvement with DEF. So it'll be interesting. Tell me just a little bit more about your family. You have a twin sister. Do you have any other brothers, sisters? What's the story?
Twin sister, half brother, who is crazy enough is a junior in college in Florida. I remember when the kid was born, like it was yesterday. It's wild. It goes quick. Mom and dad are awesome dads. Crazy entrepreneur. Mom actually does a lot in the trauma training kind of therapy world with working with first responders and veterans. It's a good crew. My sister is goes by the Seed Huntress and does a lot of international food security work and seed sovereignty work around the world. So she's always traipsing around with us on various adventures. Very cool.
So let's start with Tactivate. And it's interesting, but you call it the Tom Brown. What's the name of the place? I just want to write that down for later.
So the program I grew up going to is called the Tom Brown Tracker School, and specifically Coyote Tracks, which was the youth program, way back in the day.
Okay. Very cool. So tell us a little about Tactivate.
Yeah, so Tactivate, I had spent about 3.5 years. I had mentioned I was traveling, just hitchhiking and camping and hiking around Chile and Argentina, picked up Spanish. And then on my way back up, Babson, where I was at college, was a very entrepreneurially focused program. It's pretty much like all you do is entrepreneurship. And a lot of folks in Latin America had just told me, hey, you got to stop over in Panama on your way home and check out what's going on there. It's just going to blow you away. And this was 2006, 7 maybe. And it was wild. There was just a tremendous amount of foreign direct investment, and there was, kids in their 20s buying and flipping apartments off plan and starting record labels and running boutique hotels. It was just this insane environment. So I basically got there, got a whiff of what was going on, and said, I don't know what this is, but I'm not leaving. And kind of set up shop. And obviously we traveled back and forth. Babson was very flexible. So I finished up school, but spent a lot of time in Latin America, was using other kids at Babson to crunch numbers on deals we were looking at. And basically what we ended up doing, spent about a year just watching, learning, listening, sussing things out, picked two really specific geographies we kind of loved in the country, and did, what we called kind of culture mediation. So we helped to place foreign direct investment, but 20 years ahead of the curve, where there was very remote environment, there's contested, it was a contested logistics environment where there was drug running and mining operations and indigenous populations. And then in the other parts of the country, and this place is called the Azuero Peninsula and Casco Viejo, which were far more peaceful and tranquil. There's just a lot going on that typically happens in these environments where foreigners come in and they're Wall Street guys or whatever, and they think they know what they're doing, and they get, completely hosed, and, as do the locals, because brokers get involved, and there's cultural variances that just don't equate. And so we set up this little operations group and, kind of help to bridge that gap, to bring the foreigners directly in contact with the locals, to acknowledge development was going to happen, but say, hey, let's try to do this in a more sustainable way. And towards the end, we bought farmland, we did a development in a place called Casco Viejo. And then we got very much into the logistics side of the house when we were asked to kind of do some quote unquote project management in a remote region of the Caribbean basin, where there's a lot of drug running, inaccessible only by helicopter or by boat. And, there's mining operations, indigenous populations, foreign direct investors. And that's really where I first learned the power of, humanitarian assistance, disaster response as a way to bring typically warring factions together. And we had a lot of interesting experience and kind of concocted this model of building, really wildly unconventional networks, piecing together typically, I guess, quote unquote, government assets in the form of maritime police units, private, folks who are running around trying to, do land investment, folks who are doing any other kind of nefarious thing in the area. But, when there's huge flooding or it's a problem, everyone will actually want to come together and help.
Sure.
And that's kind of where we developed the idea for Tactivate. And then came back to the States. I'll end the long rant. It got very spicy there, I would say. I was the only kind of white guy running around a 250 nautical mile coastline. Everyone thought I was DEA. A lot of interesting things happened. I was like, okay, time's up here. I'm out of here. Ended up going to Haiti for some search and rescue. This was 2010 when the earthquake happened. I just showed up there. Ended up staying there for a year and a half.
So you just show up and help.
They showed up, another story. And then when I hit the States after that, so 2011, 12-ish, started Tactivate. Very long-winded way of saying, hey, this is, let's find a way to, bring together the special operations forces kind of approach and mindset with the, humanitarian and economic stability perspective and approach, and see if we can't kind of create a hybrid capability, which is what we've ended up doing and have been running since 2012.
Amazing. So back to Panama City or Panama. I've heard that is less safe, and this is from Colombians who told me that the place they don't go is Panama because it's more dangerous than Panama.
Than Colombia?
Yeah. Or than Colombia.
I mean, look, I think my baseline's I'm a bit off, but when we were first in areas like Casco Viejo in 2007, 8, it was in the early throes of being gentrified, and there was still a lot of gang activity and gun violence, but it was it was just kind of, it just was. It didn't feel that dangerous. Right now, there's certainly streets you don't want to go to. In the areas that I was up, in areas called the Coclea Norte, Veraguas, that's where there's a lot of FARC activity. And actually, more importantly, tumbadores, who were these kids who'd come out of Colón, Panamanian kids who would steal and rape and pillage literally where the FARC would stash their drugs along the coast with the subsistence farmers. The tumbadores would then come in. And again, there's really barely any electricity. There's no cell phone. There's no anything. So they would just come into these riverhead villages and take whatever they wanted. That area was particularly dangerous, but you had to really try to get out there, right? That wasn't an accessible region. So generally speaking, Panama's pretty safe. You have to go looking for trouble, especially now.
But then you go from Panama to Haiti during a natural disaster or shortly thereafter. Wow, frying pan into the fire kind of a thing, or how was that? I mean,
Haiti was wild. I had just left Panama. It happened. I just flew. I'm trying to remember. I flew down to the DR, got hitchhiked with a UN whatever, and then ended up joining a joint Latin American search and rescue task force, and spent about a week digging through the rubble of those guys. And then it was pretty early after it happened, but when you get to a certain stage, you're doing recovery. You're not doing it's no longer really search and rescue. And when you're crawling under 3 stories underground under these cement slabs with guys that I was working with a team, the most amazing folks you've ever met, but they didn't have a lot of like technology. Whereas the Fairfax rescue crew, like task force and the task force one guys were at the next site and they had ground piercing radar. And, so if we had something happen and the slab fell or whatever, it would have been problematic for us. So, after a while I was like done with this and, ended up calling this guy. I got a number for this guy, Mike Stewart, who I think you've met or heard of by now, who was running a small non-for-profit down at the time called Hope for Haiti. I said, hey man, someone gave me your number. I'm in country. Like if I can be helpful, whatever. He picked me up 20 minutes later in the truck and a year and a half went by, and learned a lot working with them on, really creative approaches to last mile, and, logistics and just how the whole aid world worked. Learned a tremendous amount. Spent over a year there. And then I was back to the States.
So what's Tactivate? So Tactivate started out of because of Panama and Haiti. Is that how it happened?
That was the genesis. I mean, I had grown up, as I had mentioned, going to Tom Brown, so I'd always kind of brushed up against the special operations community in like informal ways, and had was aware and familiar. And then the work we were doing in Panama, we were working with all, Panama that doesn't have like a standing military, but they've got specialized units, and we were working with those folks. And as you can imagine, in the areas we were running around, we bump into all kinds of people, doing all kinds of things. And just, saw, in my mind and our experience, and, I'm preaching to the choir here, and, special operations in particular, and that's just our experience and who we typically work with. That's not to imply conventional forces are not just as capable and creative and impactful. But they're wildly entrepreneurial, right? You have to do a lot with a very little, and in these very competitive environments, it's the epitome of entrepreneurship. So we figured, hey, if we can pair folks who are the most calm, cool, and collected, that have the most EQ on the face of the planet, that speak 6 languages, that can be in like these typically incredibly stressful environments, but say, hey, no one's shooting at us, it's all good, right? Pair them with entrepreneurs and economic stability and humanitarian folks, and you've got a really interesting, lethal, effective capacity and capability. And we didn't build it. There's 2 things that Tactivate does. One is domestically, we did a lot more of this. We don't do so much of this anymore, but we were building a lot of brick and mortar ventures when special operations forces folks would go on terminal leave, and they would be in their transition process, and we'd work with 1 or 2 of them at a time. And again, we're not like the Honor Foundation or the Next Ridgeline or one of these major transition institutes. We would just find someone through the network who said, hey, I'm getting out and I want to learn about whatever. And then we'd launch these brick and mortars, climbing gyms, co-working spaces, nightclubs, all this weird stuff. And in the process, in launching these actual physical ventures, we'd say, hey, look, here's how the civilian sector is different. Like, here's how you should think about like changing your body language. Here's the dynamic. Like, you can't trust everybody. It's not the same as, being on an ODA or whatever. And but the Sub Rosa agenda is we were doing 2 things. One is, for an example, we were building these huge climbing gyms. And while it was a construction site, and we didn't advertise we were working with veterans or first responders or anything like that, we had these incredible spaces, and we would apply the same tactics and techniques we would use in building capacity and like collective community capacity abroad to launching a startup. So we'd go and we'd kind of conduct a human train and, kind of map the organizational train in the area, and bring all these eclectic people together under one roof and say, hey, look, we've got this cool venue, this venture, this idea, this climbing gym, whatever. How can we use this to amplify what's happening already in the community? And so we do this creative stuff. We had a climbing gym, but we then started bringing like the MIT Media Lab and IDEO and, Lincoln Labs. And because we were the first ones to introduce this idea of co-working into fitness. So we'd hybridize these models. And by bringing all those folks together, what we were actually doing is building a really interesting, quiet, informal network that was really, we could then reach back into and tap and activate if we had to go and deploy and do whatever somewhere around the world. And at the same time, we were helping these folks, these veterans, to kind of gain exposure to people who could mentor them, who could hire them if they didn't want to stay with us, totally outside of the traditional, hey, let's submit your resume through HR, because that contract was not working well in society.
It's amazing with your hanging out and working with this special operations forces, how much you must have learned that from the military and paramilitary to business, and how much there is, how many learnings there are in relatable things that just fall from one to the other. What's a couple of specific examples that you've learned by doing that?
There's so many corollaries, and it's funny because like culturally, we put all the onus, I'd say we put a lot of the onus on the folks that are transitioning out, right? Like, you have to learn to adapt. It's not the same as the military. our perspective, and it's a civilian, like I think the onus is actually on civil society. Like we've done a really bad job
That's
of,
a great insight.
we say, hey, look, like veterans are assets, right? But a lot of companies say we want to hire veterans because of, ESG and they want to do the right thing. But then they hire these guys or these gals and they don't know the difference between like what the temperament of a corpsman might be compared to like a pararescueman or a ranger. Like there's all very different mission sets and these cultural nuances that given what these folks are doing in service, do very much translate and correlate to private sector activity. But if the civilian sector is not going to take the time and put the effort into adapting and figuring out how they can optimize their culture to not only attract the right people, but to retain them, then it's on us because these folks are remarkable assets. But just like you couldn't take me as a civilian and drop me into like a, SEAL Team 3 or an ODA and be like, good luck, bro. Like, yeah, you're an EMT and you've been to survival school. You can go handle combat. Like, no, not really. Probably not. Right. And we're doing that same, we did and are doing that same thing with transitioning veterans. But look, as it applies to business, I mean, a con op, right? Like, there's so many like these simple things. I take a lot from like the first response world, like, SOAP notes and medical tools that we use and like doing rapid, diagnostics, a lot from the civil affairs world and just how you assess a situation and like read body language and kind of take the temperament of a room are all very relevant to like sussing out what are the team dynamics in this company, like, who are the power players, like who, there's so much.
Yeah. It's interesting because just today I was talking with another guy, Army veteran, and he's like big into 6-22 about leadership. And in the military, we know what the leadership looks like, feels like, should act like, should be. Well, in the civilian life, we really don't. And so you take somebody who knows what leadership looks like, what organizational structure looks like, what mission looks like, and you throw them into this world of chaos that we call civilian life. What the hell is that? And man, I think what you're doing and just think the learning that people can have by working alongside Tactivate and or DEF, and we'll get into DEF in a minute. But there's just so much to be learned and translated. But I like your insights about that the civilians need to understand that they have a shared responsibility to helping our veterans succeed in civilian life. That's a really good point.
Well, it's like our loss, right? Like,
Right.
this is it's a tremendous asset class, and we have invested a lot as a society in asking these folks to do a lot and sending them off to war and training them, right? And it is a tremendous deficit, or it's not a good ROI if we don't, when these folks then come back, if we don't extend, and look, like, again, I can't speak because I am not a veteran. But, in working with the community has been my experience that, like anybody else, they just want to, their continued purpose and structure is incredibly important. Right. And I think the biggest challenge that we've seen, and this is not to be like a blanket statement, but, and a lot of it's very hard to find mission driven work in the private sector that you can also make a living at. It just
right.
is.
That's very true.
It's that's hard for a lot of folks. And so we've spent a lot of time playing with how do we create a model that is both financially, sustainable, and we can go and do the things that we all love to do, which is drafting into these weird places and helping out, whether it's the Philippines or Ukraine or, wherever.
Yeah. So. Well, it's interesting because so many veterans will find a way to serve. They'll start their own nonprofit. They'll join a nonprofit. They'll just go out and do stuff to serve others. It's absolutely amazing when you meet these men and women. It's just really cool to see. That's for sure. And I didn't realize that until I got involved into the veteran entrepreneur community. I'm like, holy crap, it's amazing. So yeah. And then you went to this place called Ukraine recently, right?
Not recently, but we went out of there. Yeah. So we showed up there a couple of days after like the kinetic activity started again. So I mean, it's not new, right? It's been going since 2014. We showed up February 26th or something like that. I don't know. It was a couple of days after it started. Had thought we were going to be there for, again, our model with Tactivate, the other side of the house is we send in these like really small specialized teams using those networks that we built through the startup world in the US to like, drop into wherever to, find a hyper local contact, hopefully have a warm introduction, and then go to work really bolstering hyper local capacity to solve whatever challenge they have on hand to like decrease or negate the need for external aid, which a lot of times can be very detrimental, and also to kind of decrease the ability for malign influence and foreign actors who take advantage of these situations, be it a humanitarian assistance, disaster response, or conflict, to kind of gain a foothold. So we were doing all kinds of stuff there, helping folks. We had some great warm introductions to various folks of the MOD and GUR, like the intelligence community in Ukraine, because through the first response world and the veteran community here, and we were able to help guys who had various skills and connections get involved and plugged in very early on to do the whole advise assist the company thing. We're helping get in medical kits and very benign stuff, and then got asked on our way out to get involved with the project, which ended up keeping us there for 2.5 years, where we were responsible for 5,000 people, did all kinds of training and equipment and emergency business continuity and all that kind of stuff. It was wild.
Wow. And so, what's Tactivate preparing for next? Do you have a certain mission set that you look natural disasters, or what are you best positioned to help out with next?
So Tactivate itself actually isn't really a business. It's more of like a holdco where the IP sits for how we do things. And then we launch these like sub LLCs of these projects. And the theme has always been, how do we reimagine readiness and the capability and capacity to be of service in the US? So how do we create like concurrent ways to activate larger swaths of civil society to be of service, right? Not everybody's gonna put on the uniform. That's a problem. That's a challenge. We think like putting on the uniform is the absolute penultimate, the best thing you can do. But look, I mean, first responders, firefighters, there's a million ways to serve. And so we've launched all these like really wacky ventures. We had like the first outdoor survival training bar in the country. We had the last thing we were doing before we went to Ukraine was called the Readiness Collective. It's like a social club for readiness training. And the goal has been, how do we take this idea of being capable of service and like being able to lean in when something happens? How do we remove that from the tactical zombie apocalypse prepper, the government's out to get us genre, and just make it like super sexy and scalable and open up to broader swaths of society? So we have these places where you could like literally come in and grab a whiskey and we teach you how to change a tire, read a map, how to use a med kit. But what we're really doing is social engineering, just like cross-pollinating local first responders, SRT teams, veterans, moms, sports teams, and like getting these people familiar with one another. So when something does happen, God forbid, locally, there's just familiarity, there's trust, there's interstitial tissue, there's skills. And so we've been toying with curriculum and models to do that for a long time. We've taken a hiatus actually after Ukraine because it was a big, it was a lot. It was a big project. And I've been focusing quite a bit on DEF actually. We're project based. We can go from like one thing, shut down, draw down on until the next project, and then start over. Essentially, is how we work. So DEF has been the current project.
Got it. And so let's talk about DEF. Tell me how did you from the start? How did you get involved with it? How did you become aware of it, and then become the executive director of it? I mean, that's an interesting journey.
No idea how I found out about it. But I was involved in it very, very early on. I thought it was the first DEF conference, but I guess it was the second one. And it was in Chicago. Ben Coleman was still running it. And we actually hosted a happy hour at our climbing gym, and we're sponsors. I've always been interested in the veteran entrepreneurial space. We hired a ton of veterans into that project in Chicago. So it's probably how I'd heard about it. And I was like, man, this is the coolest thing, because I'm an entrepreneur, but I'm very, my love and passion is national security. And as a civilian, there's only so much you can do, right? It's very hard to in a lot of ways to you can do a lot, but like there's this barrier that you're never going to cross, right? And rightfully so. Like you haven't put on the uniform. And DEF was the first organization that I found that really allowed, me and other people like me who were just interested in the space to gain a foothold and to gain entry and to be able to, like, if you really wanted to have impact, people would give you a seat at the table, which I thought was outstanding. So I was always a fanboy, and I was involved on the leadership team for various, projects over the years. And then maybe 2 years ago, Jay Long, who's a good buddy of mine who you might have met, who's on the board, basically voluntold. I was like, hey man, do you want to be the executive director for this thing? Because, Trish was running it before me, did an awesome job. Her time was up, and, COVID was really hard on the organization.
Trish Martinelli, my neighbor.
Yep. It's awesome. And I was, so I was like, yeah, sure. That would be tremendous honor. Like I always thought one day, man, I would love to run this organization. So stepped into it and have slowly, been running into one brick wall after another. I'm not really an NGO guy, so we're figuring it out as we go. But I think from my, at least personal purview, I think DEF as an organization's time has really come, right? We always like to say informal network is a strategic weapon system or is a strategic capability. and DEF has persisted organically for 11 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
As an all
And
volunteer
so
organization. Yeah.
you've been involved with it since 2014 or something like that?
Thereabouts,
Around
yeah,
there?
since 2000, yeah, around that time. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean,
Okay.
on and off, I was not, there's years I had nothing to do with it. And then I served for a short stint on the leadership team, on the community advisory, something or other, I don't remember, with Jerry
Mm-hmm.
McCoy. But I've always, tried to keep tabs on it. Always, tried to go to the conferences and support where we could.
Got it. So what's the mission of DEF?
Our mission statement's kind of always changing, but what I think the through line has always been, cultivating informal networks is a strategic capability, right? Like,
Okay.
how do we continue to like bring folks together who would never otherwise cross paths? And we like to say we're working to increase the surface area for serendipity and national security.
Mm-hmm.
So, with the geopolitical realities changing really quickly, our apparatus, from a Department of War perspective, is not necessarily fine-tuned for today's realities. And whether you're involved in the Afghan evac or running around Ukraine, it's very clear that the way things are being done are just very different, right?
Mm-hmm.
And while the apparatus and the system works to adapt and catch up, and there's a tremendous amount going on in the innovation space, and onshoring and production and dual use and AI, it's incredible. And there's this massive uptick in PE, venture capital and PE is incredible, but we haven't quite figured it out yet. And in that time, it's these really informal resource communities that are coming together, whether it's prior and current service folks or NGOs or individuals who just want to contribute and are getting really, really, really incredible things done incredibly quickly for less than pennies on the dollar, if not for free. And that dynamic is really, I think, where DEF thrives, right? So whether you're a dual use guy going to work trying to, get involved with the drone world, or you're a humanter, or you're an IW, whatever the DEF is this really eclectic community with academics, flag officers and general officers, lance corporals, like just such a broad swath of folks that, we know a guy who knows a guy, right? Or we know a gal who knows a gal. And it's just, that's all it is. It's a trusted network. We don't put out a lot of information. We don't fundraise on social media. We're kind of quiet. But you ask any two people what DEF is, and they'll give you two very different answers because they've made it work for themselves. And most people say, yeah, DEF's cool, but we don't really know what it does. And that's a totally fair and accurate statement. But I would say, for those who lean in and leverage the network, it's incredibly potent. And that's a smaller group of people. And the hope is we're able to actually finally raise some real resources and hire an executive director who actually knows what they're doing, right? And so in the support team, because I think the organization deserves dedicated leadership and resources to really professionalize, which we've been talking about for over a decade with this thing, right? But that's the kind of current goal.
Got it. So how do people connect to DEF? How do people find out? How do they connect, collaborate, celebrate? How does that typically happen?
That's a question for you, our new DC Agora lead.
That's right.
Yeah, so we have these chapters. Some more active than others. They're called Agoras. Some people call them drinking thinks, and they're just local chapters like New York, DC. We've got a group in the Midwest. We call them the Midwest Mafia, around like NSW Ukraine. Some stuff popping up on the West Coast with Greta. So people just get together and they typically one month it's not a lecture, but it's something informative, right? Where it's very interactive. And then the next month or the second event that month might just be getting together and hanging out and having some drinks. So that's one way. Online, we used to use pretty heavy on Slack. That's kind of died off over the years. We're now switching to something called Mission Cultivate, which is it's a new startup, which is, kind of a less noisy LinkedIn targeted for government and DOW folks. And we're toying with the online world, but DEF in a lot of ways is anathema to the times, in that it's an old school person to person community centric organization, and it's hard to scale that, and it's hard to explain the value in that and to qualify and quantify the impact unless you've experienced and tasted it. So that's I don't know that it'll ever become a big thing or a flashy organization. But for those who do lean in and kind of and are not here just to transact, but are here to truly help one another, it's pretty cool because you can call, pick up the phone, you call and say, "Hey guys, I need this," and a pretty interesting and powerful and connected group of people will typically answer the call and go to bat for you.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, the event we attended recently at the river at the place was just amazing. So many great people. The experiences that people had and were willing to share was mind blowing. That was unbelievable. I walked away from that weekend going, I won't tell you what I thought. It was amazing. So cool. It was really, really, really effing cool. That's probably the way I would describe it. That's for sure. What I want to do with, just brainstorm a little bit with you here is I want to get the deaf community tied in with the AI community, or the deaf community tied in with X community, and do that going forward. And not all of them, but some of the agoras, to have that kind of mix and mingle and get to know other people that are also working on national defense puzzles, as I'll call them. And they are the threats are changing so fast that we can't even keep straight. And my grandpa once told me, you cannot email a handshake, and that's more true today than ever. And to have those eye-to-eye conversations, share a beverage. I don't care if it's tea, coffee, or that stuff you drink. I can't remember what it's called.
Yeah, I mean, talk about coffee. Good. I don't know how many people know that you're like the coffee maestro, but man, that was the best cup of coffee I've ever had.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. I keep looking for I can't remember what you shared with me. I got to write it down. But I've been looking for it at stores, and I haven't found it yet.
Yerba mate.
Yerba mate.
Yeah.
So I will find some yerba mate. And I did read about it, and the health benefits are true. They're real. So it's pretty amazing that, how do I say this? Thank gosh we have all of our medical doctors in the world, and they're great. But you go say, hey, I have this issue on chat, and it comes back and says, hey, try these things that will help. And 8 out of 10 times it does. Why didn't my doctor tell me about that? So it's amazing. Yeah. So yerba mate is I think what blood pressure, blood glucose. And
I mean, it beats. I mean, for me, it's just it's hold you steady and clean energy throughout the day. So it's been a godsend for years.
Yeah. So with deaf, we have the agoras, we have the online presence. What are the priorities that you see for the deaf community to figure out, puzzles to be working on right now? What are you hearing? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, to your point. I mean, you mentioned the River House. Like, that's where I'm sitting right now, right? And what we did is we, Defense Entrepreneurs Forum. So we do things that are like maybe inherently more risky and less calculated to experiment, right? Because fail forward, fail fast. A lot of folks who might be listening to this are not unfamiliar with the idea of a team house, right? So anytime we drop into any AO, like, we typically have some sort of team house. That's what the intent of this place is. We're 35, 40 minutes, maybe 45 minutes from DC and Alexandria, but you might as well be in a different country, right? Mile-long driveway surrounded by woods, on the water, eagles, fire pit, and
sauna. And don't forget the sauna.
And well, sometimes if you want to sponsor, we still have to buy one. We rent a sauna. Right. We're working on it. But to get to your point, like, look, it is incredibly important. I think there's a lot of inertia on the tech adaptation, on modernization, on resiliency, on like looking at readiness. There's a lot of folks like really working on that stuff, right? What concerns me is anytime there's like this linear narrative and this horde mentality, you need to take a step back and be like, hold on a second, right? And as a country, we are now really spooled up, right? And rightfully so, at looking at our vulnerabilities from like a critical and rare earth minerals perspective, onshoring production, you name it, right? Like we've identified, and I'm not so sure we're still having an honest conversation with the civil populace about like our true vulnerabilities from, a malign influence perspective, from a infrastructure perspective, power grid, like, and not to be alarmist, but like, these are things that are, if you're in the first response community or, you have anything to do with national security, we've been having these conversations for over a decade. It's not net new, but we very consciously have pieced and parsed like the civil populace out of the equation because, it's our job to protect them, which I think is a huge problem, right? I mean, I would personally argue, and I can't necessarily speak for DEF, but I think the greatest strategic asset that the United States has is the creative entrepreneurial prowess of the populace, right? And if we don't involve civil society, we're really negating a huge part of our capability and our capacity as a nation. And so, look, our online presence and our tech stack is mediocre at best, right? Like, I mean, we don't do anything there that's noteworthy. In fact, anyone could probably step in and upskill us and upgame us and help us with that tremendously, right? We could do better there from a collaboration perspective. We have an AI Agora. The vast majority of the deaf community currently is very focused on dual use, addressing the procurement challenges. But these are the conversations we've been having for a really long time, right? And you've got to take a step back and say, well, hold on a second. What about the human element, right? Like at the end of the day, whether you're focused on trust or on technology and you think like compute's the biggest issue, or like drones or whatever the case may be, at the end of the day, to get this stuff done as quickly and as effectively and as efficiently as we need to, our systems are dated, and that's not a knock on the system, but it's difficult to navigate that world, especially for these new entrants who aren't familiar with the contracting and CIVRs and OTAs and all that stuff. Who matters, right? Like anything else in the world, like whose hand have you shaken? Like who trusts you? Who can you call to facilitate all of this? And I think that's DEF's priority, right? Is I don't care whether you're focusing on tech or AI or life sciences. Like Michelle Hoko just did an amazing podcast we shared in our newsletter. Like who's really talking about the biological, elements at play? Who's really talking about in earnest, like this whole, what concerns me is like we've othered like gray area activity, right? Like gray zone, like, malign influence and like cyber. We've made it sound like it's the special directorate, and we've othered it when I would argue it's like, that's current day conflict. Like that is the traditional conventional battle space, not the gray zone. Right. And we're just not really tackling the problem set, in my mind, or like the full brunt force of what we could be doing, because we've made it this like esoteric kind of thing. So long-winded answer, like I think DEF, is trying to vet and connect as many, high trust, high integrity folks that we can to help facilitate and enable, whatever, piece of software or hardware or approach or modality that needs to be implemented quickly.
Yeah, it's funny because you said connect just as I was writing it down. It's about connecting, engaging, teaching and leading, and bringing those different people together to do that together. So that's pretty cool.
Yep.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. So what's I know our time goes short here, Jesse, but what's one or two things that we should all know about DEF, or how do we find out more about DEF?
Website's super easy. I think Morgan Plummer's to thank for this, if I remember correctly, but def.org, right? Website's a little dated, but apparently I think our membership models like got cleaned up. So you sign up, it's free. You can choose to donate. We do, of course, appreciate it. Our burn rate is pretty low, but the funds help. And once you join DEF, we'll get you onto Mission Cultivate, which we're starting to populate with more and more content and kind of test out as a communication platform. But like, look, I mean, anybody, I would say if you come to DEF predominantly and primarily to transact, you're not going to experience what DEF is.
That's right.
If you come to DEF, and like that'll happen if you have something that's good and you're a good guy or good, one, or you've got the right intent, very likely you will find a deal or something will happen as a result of being involved in the community. But the folks who should come and seek out DEF are folks who just really, really care and like want to lean in and understand it's sloppy and it's messy and it's like not the most professional, tight organization that's out there. But like there's a lot of people in the ranks of DEF that are just phenomenal patriots, right? That are just doing incredible things. Yeah. And we refer to it as the virtuous insurgency because these folks now, we're now in our late 30s, early 40s, have taken very, very senior positions of power and are wielding tremendous influence and are accessible, right? And understand how the game is played and have been to Iraq and Afghanistan and understand the lethargy of the systems and what needs to change. And they're part of the virtuous insurgency, right? So if there's an emergency or you want someone you really want to connect them with, it can happen.
That's right. So Jesse, what's a question I have not asked you yet that I should have about DEF or Tactivate or both?
I think, lessons, the greatest lessons I've learned, and I don't know that I've been the best on in this podcast, are watch, right? Watch and listen and trust your gut. I've gotten in the most trouble when I have been like enamored by someone or something. And this happens a lot to veterans. And it's actually happened to me recently in the Ukraine project where I was so enamored with someone that I failed to trust my gut and I failed to do my diligence. And I got myself into trouble, right? So what I would say to the veteran community is like, and again, it's been my experience. I can't speak as a veteran, but it's been my experience that these folks have tremendous EQ and can suss out good people, right? And bad people. And that instinct is incredibly important. And I would say particularly so when transitioning to the civilian society, because there's a lot of folks praying on the transitioning veteran, both from an organizational perspective, from a money perspective, from a hiring perspective. So trust your gut. And this is going to sound so cliche and, blasé at this point, but like really like, your community is your ultimate currency, right? I mean, it's not, don't go onto LinkedIn just to try to grow your network, like figure out a way to have I'd rather you have one or two super authentic relationships than 500 followers with people you don't know on LinkedIn. And understand that asking for help and support is the most, is the bravest thing you can do, and gives other people the opportunity to support you, which is incredibly rewarding. So it's not a vulnerability or a deficit. It's actually being tremendously gracious, and being vulnerable enough to ask for support and help and guidance.
That's right. I remember a number of years ago, I had a medical challenge, and a good friend of mine said, why aren't you telling people? I was like, well, he said, are you embarrassed? He says, you didn't do that. You didn't hurt yourself. That happened. He says, you got to let people know so they can help you. And when I did, the great things that happened for me because I was finally vulnerable was amazing. I was like, oh, didn't know I'd get that connection. Didn't know I'd get that resource. Didn't know I'd get that. It was amazing. So by being vulnerable and sharing the challenge I was given a lot of gifts that were amazing. So by doing that, by trusting, and that happened. So
and I think that's a direct antithesis to how we train a lot of these folks, right? But I think that's changing. Hopefully, I'd like to think that culture is shifting a bit. But yeah, well said.
Yeah, very cool. So Jesse, I want to say thank you so much. We're going to do a $100 donation in your name to the MilCom Founders Scholarship Fund. Okay, so that goes to one kid that's going to go to college, another kid that's going to go to a trade school. And
awesome.
Just really appreciate your insights and time.
Thanks for joining us on the MilCom Founders Podcast. If you know a MilCom founder with a story to share, reach out to us at milcomfounders.com. For each guest on our show, One Degree Financial donates $100 to the Dick Floges Veteran Entrepreneur Scholarship Fund, supporting education for children of a MilCom business owner. Stay ready.